Hey guys, I'm Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC and BHSpringSolutions.com, back again for a very special presentation part of High Power University here at the end of January 2023. And this is all about the FN High Power. And if you hear me emphasize high, they respelled high and we don't have HI power anymore, which has been kind of the customary name for high power pistols. They went with HIGH power, so if you hear me emphasize high, that's kind of meaning this particular high power. We've had a lot of questions. Are you going to do a review or an evaluation on FN's new high power? And that's what you're looking at right here. And they have several different versions of them. And the first thing that we really had to do in order to answer that question, would we be talking about these, including them in High Power University, was, is it really a high power? And we answered that question in a actually written evaluation and analysis that's going to be available at BHSpringSolutions.com. And we do make, we do believe that yes, there's a case that yes, this is a high power. This, the operating system and the fire control group of the FN's new high power follows the same process of a chain of events as the original P35 did, all the way back to John Browning's 1927 Grand Rendiment patent. It's not been changed. The basic principles, which is trigger causes a trigger lever inside or a trigger pawl to rise, and it engages a sear lever in the slide, and that sear lever then engages the sear and allows the hammer to come forward to the firing pin and fire. That principle, or that same chain of events and how the trigger resets, that has not changed. The parts have all changed. Nothing interchangeable in this handgun with any previous generations of any guns called a high power. And likewise, you can't go back and forth with, maybe a pin or something, here and there. Is this a high power? I think we have a good case that yes, this is a high power, and it should be evaluated as a high power. And I think the natural thing to do in any evaluation, there's always a component that it asks the question, compared to what? So probably we're going to be comparing what we would consider to be the most advanced high powers that are available today, that use the old high power platform that was manufactured by FN. Today we see Springfield, we see Gersan in that world with the old design of the high power pistol, and of course a lot of a very large pre-owned market of the old high power design. We're just going to compare this head to head, and we thought that would be a great way to evaluate it and see what FN changed, and just try to be as completely objective as we possibly can. We're going to now move to the table where we're going to be able to do a lot of that comparison and take a look at all the inside and inner workings of FN's new high power. Okay, so thanks for joining me at the table, and we are looking at the subject of the day there in the middle of the screen, the FN High Power. Introduced in 2022 as a single-action semi-auto handgun that retains many of the operational principles and similarities of parts and approaches that found in the original FN P35, which retained many of the design elements of John Browning's 1927 Grand Rendiment. The FN High Power retains the elements of a trigger pivoting on an axis. We're going to go ahead and we're going to disassemble, and everything on the table is right now slide locked back. Just I can see that everything here is empty, and we're playing with all empty firearms. We're going to go ahead and show you the takedown of the FN High Power. It's a little different, and we are magazine free. We're going to lock the slide back with the slide stop, not with the safety, with the slide stop. Then we've got a takedown lever here, and we're going to press that downward like that, release our slide stop, and slide comes off of the end. We have in essence the same type of fire control group and operating system that was originally prescribed in John Browning's patent for a handgun that was really never mass produced, called the 1927 Grand Rendiment most commonly. And that same system went to the P35 high power, and it's retained in this new FN high power rendition. You see a trigger lever that rises, or trigger pawl that rises when the trigger is pulled. That is consistent with what the high power design has been. When it is pulled, it contacts a sear lever. That sear lever is right here. It's a bar that starts there, comes down the side there, and it's engaged by that trigger pawl that was rising in the frame right there. And that causes it to cam downward towards the frame here, back to the sear, which is found right there, and there's the engagement surface for the sear. When that sear is pressed downward, that is what allows the hammer to then go forward like that, and then to the firing pin and to fire the weapon. So that chain of events, as well as how the trigger resets, is really, you know, it's redesigned in that, you know, none of the parts are interchangeable anywhere. So it's like all the parts have been, you know, somehow redesigned. But the same kind of chain of events, you know, same sort of parts and that do the same thing are in the similar kind of places. So from the standpoint of the operational principles of the fire control group in the new FN high power, there is absolutely a case for including the FN high power among the legacy of handguns previously considered to be high powers. So that's, we believe, to be the legitimacy of having FN's new high power featured here in High Power University. And you see the reassembly goes back together just like this. You cam up the takedown lever, and everything is back and ready to go. There's a critical note we want to talk about very early in this session of High Power University, and that is the operating system of the FN High Power has differences that should be understood by all users, including all users who have previously used and understood the manual of arms associated with other single-action handguns like the P35 original high power or any 1911. This operating system contains significant differences that must be understood prior to active use with live ammunition. And we're going to say that right up front. There are aspects about this subject that are stated more than once here in the owner's manual. We're going to show that to you from FN. They did do the right thing, absolutely, by doing what they did, by being repetitive about some things. However, one of the things that we picked up very immediately were these differences in the operating system. One specific thing, and then we're going to talk about this probably multiple times, FN does, and I'm going to talk about it several times, just because I can see a mistake coming that some veteran users of high powers and 1911s could make, and that is FN is very adamant about once you have chambered a round, you do not attempt to lower this hammer. There is not a decocker. There are two things you can do. You can be on safe or you can be on fire. And those are the two things. But there are no situations when there is a round in the chamber when it is ever going to be appropriate to decock this hammer. There does not exist the safety provisions for that. It was always an unsafe maneuver, frankly, but there's not the safety provisions for that now. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. If I was thinking, back in the old days, we have a half cock position, and I go ahead and I pull the trigger, let the hammer come forward just a little bit. It's actually slipped out of my thumb a couple of times. But I want you to notice now, I did that and everything would have been okay, but there's no half cock position anymore. that goes all the way to the firing pin. And when there is a round in the chamber, that's always going to be an inappropriate maneuver. Do not ever do it. Once you have chambered a round in this handgun, by racking the slide, that hammer is going to stay where it's at. It needs to stay where it's at. There's no safe way to maneuver it when there's a round in the chamber. So that's one thing that we want to point out right up front, because just in my initial handling of the handgun and attempting to do that maneuver, it does not feel the same as a 1911 or a high power when you'd be attempting that maneuver. It's a common maneuver by, frankly, too many of us. It is one that you will not do safely without that half-cock position on the hammer tooth. So that is a consideration right up front. I think FN makes a very hard case in their owner's manual, if you read it, for this being a Condition 3 handgun, possibly a Condition 3 handgun only. In fact, I mean, some of the red letters and red directives by FN in their owner's manual would absolutely add up to the assertion forward that this is a Condition 3 handgun intended to be empty chambered until it is ready to be used and fired. So be that as it may, can it be carried cocked and locked? Well, yeah, it appears so. And we'll be talking about that as well. Okay, we want to run to some slide frame dimensions and weight matters. First of all, one of the things we notice as a difference is the width of the slide here on the new FN high power is wider than on the original P35 by almost 2 millimeters. 24.4 millimeters wide for the new FN high power and 22.5 millimeters. So that's 1.9 millimeters difference. That's close to 10%. So the original P35 did have a narrower slide. The dimension here on the new FN high power, this would be a slide width dimension that we would associate with one of a couple things. One, either they're planning maybe in the future to do polymer frame for this particular handgun and they need that additional slide mass, or potentially larger calibers for the same handgun or something in the future. And we're just only speculating about that. The slide being wider and heavier than the original P35, we found the FN, this contradicts with some of the published material that we have seen about this FN high power, talking about it being 40 ounces unloaded. With magazine unloaded, we had a weight of 37.6 ounces, and on the FN high power, that compared to an empty with magazine weight in a P35 of 32.2 ounces. So about 5.4 ounces difference or heavier with the new high power has been realized there. Fully loaded, the new FN high power is 46.2 ounces. A P35 with a 17 round magazine. That would be with a magazine that kind of looks like that right there. And that would be a 17 round. That would be 40.8 ounces fully loaded with 17 plus 1. And we're going to go ahead, we'll pop a magazine in here, and we're talking about kind of comparisons in size. So right now with the +2 base plate here on the original P35, we can actually overlay these pistols just like that, and I probably don't have a great camera angle, but it's interesting because you can see even right here that is just, the dimension is just the same, and length, height. I actually think that the original P35 is actually a shorter handgun than the new high power. Definitely the original P35 is lighter with the same capacity. We have the same profile. We just, with the With the P35, you can also have a smaller profile as far as that grip frame is concerned and still have a 15-round capacity. You really don't have that option, because what's happened here is just obviously they've lengthened the grip frame in order to get those additional 2 rounds of magazine capacity and still have something close to a flush fit. What we can say is, just from purely a size and weight carry perspective, this package probably does make more sense if the frame were polymer, in order to get the overall package, weight back to where it's kind of competitive in today's world. Let's talk about grip frame ergonomics. The grip frame of the FN High Power, it's not changed significantly from the original High Power. One of the things that we have seen over the years with the P35, and as an example, BHSpringSolutions Masters grips that are on this particular grip frame. So you're going to see our grip frame on the left creates a profile. The grip frame on the right creates a profile. Interestingly, the circumference around these 2 grip frames is almost identical. However, one of them, the one on the left, creates a profile for the hand to hold. In other words, if I'm imagining right now that I'm wrapping my hand around a grip frame, I would do something just about like that. I have like a backwards letter C there, but it's not a rectangle. And for me to make a rectangle hold, my hand needs to wrap around something that doesn't feel quite as natural as something that is ergonomic and that kind of makes that, if you will, that backwards letter C shape that my hand likes to make. And, it's a different, more kind of ergonomic grip hold that the original P35 evolved to, particularly with Masters grips from BHSpringSolutions, in order to get that sort of a feel in the hand. So that's it. It's rectangular. It's this is a little more brick-like than some, how you say, Browning feeling handguns or ergonomics, might be. The dimensions of the grip frame this way. Potentially we're looking at a grip frame that's also designed to potentially be adaptable to some other calibers, maybe. It could be what what they're looking forward down the road about where this is concerned, but that's what it is. Real quick, ambidextrous slide stop does have an ambidextrous slide stop. It does work, and frankly, it's more stable than other efforts to make an ambi slide stop on the original P35. So that is a feature of the new High Power. And different than in the P35, the slide release does not interact with the recoil spring guide rod. So while the slide release and manual safeties are full-time ambi, the magazine catch is single side only, but it is reversible. So if I'm left-hand dominant, I can easily reverse that magazine catch, but it will still always be only one-sided. It's not going to be an ambidextrous magazine catch in the form of like what is available for the P35, so that you have capability on both sides. Not going to be that. Okay, back to the operating system. We've already kind of given you the punchlines here about the operating system. Most similar to the original P35 operating system, with a few critical differences. No half-cocked position of the hammer. Hammer is either cocked or resting on the firing pin, one of those two positions. The owner's manual advises that after the slide is racked and around is chambered, user should not attempt to manually lower the hammer, and this is an important instruction to follow with this new FN High Power. And for any 1911 or High Power purists out there, please don't be stubborn about this and, oh, I can do it. Probably you can, but the natural margin of safety, mechanical margin of safety, which was that half-cock position in the event that a hammer slips from a thumb that's trying to lower it, that half-cock position after the trigger has been released, as example on this very early P35 here. When I release that hammer and now I let go of the trigger, I have a half-cock position. It's not going home to the firing pin. That's there to protect me if that maneuver is what's happening. You don't have that here. And it is noteworthy that we'll notice here in the owner's manual, do not manually lower the hammer when a cartridge is chambered. Pulling the trigger to release the hammer disengages the safety mechanisms and greatly increases the risk of an unintentional discharge, which may result in serious injury or death. 2 pages, 3 pages over. Back the other way. We have it said, the same thing is being said, but in different words, but just as plainly. Do not manually decock the hammer with a cartridge chambered. Manually lowering the hammer creates a substantial risk of unintentionally firing the pistol that could result in serious injury or death. So what they are saying is, this old maneuver, which I've considered to be one that was never a safe maneuver anyway, but of lowering the hammer on an empty chamber, this must be taken out of your handling practices. If it's part of your handling practices with your 1911s or your high powers, hopefully it's not. The SFS system, the one that allows, for example, the P35 to be carried in this condition, you pull the safety off, the hammer cocks, you want to go back on safe, you push the hammer forward. This particular system is made specifically to lower the hammer safely when the chamber is in fact loaded. You don't have that kind of capability here, and you don't have the margins of safety that were inherent to the original P35. So this is a critical thing. Again, it can't be stated enough, because some handling things become so unconscious and so normal for us that things happen because it's just habit. So if you have one of the new high powers, we just encourage you so much to read the owner's manual first, understanding the manual of arms, and follow what they're saying to you, especially about this subject of, I've racked it, now I have a round in the chamber, and what can I do? I want to uncock it. Well, you're going to unload it. You're not going to uncock it. You're going to take out your magazine. You're going to have your fingers off the trigger. You're going to rack the slide. You're going to have the slide remove the round that's in the chamber. You're going to confirm you're clear. Now, if you want to, whatever, you can lower the hammer on an empty chamber. Now you have your hammer lowered. Otherwise, you're going to put the weapon on safe until you have fully unloaded it. There's no instances you're going to be lowering that hammer on an empty chamber. We just can't say it. We cannot say it enough. In my initial handling of this handgun, twice, if I would have had a round in the chamber when I was just, getting familiar with the controls and how they work, twice I would have likely had a discharge. So again, we can't emphasize this. We can't emphasize this enough. FN has done the right things as far as putting it in writing in multiple different ways, even. Okay, it's important to understand the slide can be racked and the weapon loaded and unloaded with the manual safety in the on-safe position full time. In fact, FN does advocate that as well. In other words, now, we are in the on-safe position. We can rack the slide. The slide is not locked. We can load. We can unload. We don't even have to even go off of the safe position until we are ready to fire the weapon. That is a difference. That is a change. As is the case with all, for example, Glock handguns, the slide is never locked. And this is another important one for you to understand. Making a drop scenario on the butt of the handgun a potentially problematic event, since the slide can attempt to cycle itself as a result of a drop on the butt and often cause an ammunition jam. What does that mean? What that means is we're in the on-safe position. Here's an old original P35, also cocked and in the on-safe position. Slide fully locked. If this is dropped on the butt of the gun, the slide is not going to try to cycle itself. It is decisively locked by the manual safety. That's not what the manual of arms is for the new high power. For the new high power, if you drop this on the butt of the gun, the slide wants to keep going, and the slide to some degree is going to keep going. If it goes just a little bit, it's going to empty the chamber, possibly eject the empty round in the chamber. But the video I've seen most often with non-locking slides on semi-autos is when they're dropped on the butt of the gun like this. They normally are managed to extract the round in the chamber most commonly, but they jam the next round in the magazine because it just doesn't fully cycle. So, and then you have a malfunction of your handgun. This is something just to bear in mind, and that is, if in the event of a drop on the butt of the gun, this slide is going to want to continue to the rear. It's going to want to cycle the gun, and if it's dropped, you know, depending on the angle and the inertia, it very well may partially cycle the gun. The manual safeties are enlarged compared to the safeties on the Mark III high power, and easier to manipulate. With a high grip hold or even the normal grip hold, it would be effortless or easy to manipulate the safeties upward with the shooting hand thumb during shooting. What we mean there, and I think this can kind of give you an idea of the ease that manual safety works. It's very, very, very effortless. And you've always got this wonderment or question, especially I think with the grip scenario here, where you don't have positive thumb positioning or intuitive thumb positioning being caused by the grip frame or the grips. In a rapid fire scenario, is it possible for that thumb to want to ride up the safety and ride under the safety? Well, with this handgun, it's a little different scenario because the entire slide can be cycled when the safety is on. It can also be engaged. Let's say that, you know, the slide's in the middle of cycling. It can be engaged here. It can be engaged at any point during the slide's travel. So this is not something a thumb could just ride up if it just happened to ride up at the back of recoil, or when the slide's in the forward position it could activate. No, it can activate any time during the entire slide cycling. So this is something that I think a user needs to practice, and that is, you do not want to be so aggressive holding this gun so high that you've got your thumb all the way up here, because you are just that much, or just a little, from going into the on-safe position, in which case, you know, your firing is finished for the moment. So, again, that's something just to be aware of. Last thing, racking the slide, the last two things here. Racking the slide with the safeties in the on position. This has to be done very carefully, because the thumbnails and the thumbs running right into these enlarged or enhanced safety levers, that is quite painful. So that has to be done with a little bit of caution. And then, of course, the way that FN encourages carry is with the hammer down, chamber empty, and that would be completely condition 3. And you'll notice you cannot go to the on safe position if you're in this position. So it would be very simple, deholster, rack the slide, and now you're ready to go. That is what they clearly advocate in the owner's manual. Okay, let's talk about recoil control. We're going to do that in the next session of High Power University, all about the FN High Power. I'm Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC, and BHSpringSolutions.com. Hey guys, Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC, and BHSpringSolutions.com, and we are continuing our special series of High Power University with the FN High Power. It's H-I-G-H power. That would be the subject of our sessions now. This is a continuing session, And whether it's a separate session or a just a continuation, we're moving on to recoil control about the new FN high power. I want to go ahead and get these out of the way. These are optional, looks like sort of olive green kind of grips that come with the new FN high power. It comes with a spare. This one came with a spare 17-round magazine. Okay, recoil control. There's a simplified plastic recoil spring guide rod. Now that plastic guide rod protrudes through the end of the slide during recoil, as you see. When the slide is in forward battery, there's just a hole in the slide. The recoil spring is a single spring round wire and is visible through the opening in the front of the slide. Curiously enough, now what I want to show you right here is that, and you can kind of see the recoil spring. See if we get it in the right light there, down inside, and if we were shining a light in there, we'd see the end of the recoil spring guide rod itself. But this sort of secondary openness, secondary to the barrel, which is already open, of course, this is different. Haven't seen this in high powers before. This sort of openness to the environment, even on the full-length guide rod FM Detective, it was a much more closed design. This is definitely different, and I'm kind of reserving judgment on this part because in some ways my jury is a little still out. Personally, I require a little bit more just a closed environment for the operating mechanism and functions inside the gun. This is the new recoil spring guide rod. It is a simple plastic part, and recoil spring is quite familiar looking for a gun of this size, and single round wire recoil spring. And we see that the barrel has been fully redesigned. We'd like to see this rounded engagement area here in the barrel's cam lug, and that's how the crown work looks on the new barrel. It's a simplified design, simpler to manufacture, less sensitive to critical tolerances probably than the first one was. So anyway, that is the recoil control. Now barrel bushing and slide relationship. This is a simplified design where the barrel bushing is concerned. Your typical high powers, right around the barrel there, you see that's a barrel bushing. That barrel bushing is brazed into the slide and intended to be permanent. The barrel bushing is what allows the barrel to go in to the slide at an angle, and then for it to settle down, and then we're looking for the barrel to be firm and stationary in the slide, and it is. Now aesthetically, this one doesn't look all that impressive. When the slide's in forward battery, you see how we kind of have what appears to be a gap at the top of the barrel and the slide. That's superficial, what you're seeing in the forward most part of the slide. Just rearward of here, this gets to be a very, very snug fit. So this is not something you're seeing. It may look a little sloppy, but as you can see, what I'm doing here, very, very, very little, very stationary. Nice. Nice job, actually. And there's no separate barrel bushing. The barrel bushing itself appears to have been machined integral to the slide itself. So basically the slide appears to serve as the barrel bushing. We did make one noteworthy note here, that the open design at the front of the slide of the FN high power creates a significant opportunity for whatever the environment is outside the pistol to enter the pistol and commingle with the internal working factors of the firearm that enable successful functions. The barrel lockup design, and what that does is it offers a lot more opportunities for the environment to invade and intrude into the internal workings of the firearm.
The barrel lockup design that necessitates much more openness of the slide to the environment, although a common design, it does invite the environment inside more than the slide barrel design of the original P35 did. Since the business end of the barrel does already constitute one hole in the front of the gun, perhaps maybe the why not two holes in the front of the gun question prevailed, that being the extra opening here in the front of the slide. The second hole in the front of the gun leads directly to where the recoil spring and guide rod and slide end frame and barrel and slide are all needing to be working harmoniously with each other, and those internal workings are open to the environment. So again, it's a different design. It's kind of understandable in a way, you know, sort of why they did it. But I think, you know, everybody's got to make their own choices where this is concerned. Certainly, you know, as long as the environment's not going to get dirtier than a paved parking lot, you know, it probably, you know, everything's going to be okay. Let's talk extraction and ejection. The extractor design, we can best see that actually with the slide off as well. The extractor design returns to John Browning's internal extractor design with an extractor claw redesign that is very large and far brawnier than the P35's internal or external extractors were. And if we can get a look at this, we'll see right back here. That gives you the idea that's one end of an internal extractor. But when we get up here on this end, right here is what we're looking at. It's right there. And that's big. That's the actual extractor claw. Let's see if I can get something here to point that out with. It's right there. And during cycling, the cartridge casing gets behind that extractor claw. That's what's responsible for holding the empty cartridge casing on its way to the ejector and then out of the firearm. That's a significant redesign. So far in just dry cycling actual ammunition, everything is cycled very, very smooth. You slide a cartridge casing behind this extractor claw. The hold is firm, but not crazy. And the arm of the extractor itself, as with John Browning's 1911 extractor design, the arm does act as a spring during the extractor's function. So that's what they have done. And we take a look at the ejector. The ejector still is in the same place, mounted between, you know, similar parts as before, but the ejector part itself is much brawnier looking. I would say the engagement surface here is brawnier than the ejector on the traditional P35. So extraction and ejection was definitely on FN's mind, and it appears that they did something about it. And at least, you know, in our initial evaluation and analysis, this is a plus for this model, that they have fully resolved one of the maybe the marginal aspects, if you will, of the P35, which was a thinner, less engaging extractor, I guess you would say. They have endeavored to better that. And so that's something that we notice as a difference. One other thing, different than a 1911 internal extractor, which this is, that design, this internal extractor installs and uninstalls from here outward, this direction. In other words, you don't go in and out the back, and which you could probably guess, that's pretty small right there. That's a fairly big extractor claw, and it's never going out that hole at the other end. So it has to, and does, uninstall the opposite way of a 1911 extractor. It's interesting, interesting design work, we thought. Okay, and finally, we're to trigger sub-assembly. And we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. The trigger sub-assembly is redesigned. And we'll see if we can get light in here on how that redesign looks. Here's your trigger lever. That trigger lever resets. When the sear lever comes back forward, when the slide comes back forward, pushes that forward, trigger's released, and then the trigger lever resets. And nothing real noteworthy different about it. The parts look different. Does not contain a magazine disconnect. That might be why Browning didn't get involved with this gun. Browning is usually very insistent on magazine disconnects in their handguns. Trigger is similar in construction to a stock trigger on the original P35. However, the placement of the angle of the trigger inside the trigger guard matches the placement of the angle of the BH Advanced High Power trigger subassembly. At the forward position, the trigger is moved rearward in the trigger guard area, and the resulting trigger pull is more purely straight rearward than the down and back motion of the original trigger in the P35 prior to the BH Advanced trigger subassembly for high power. So a couple of years ago, BHSpringSolutions introduced a advanced trigger subassembly for the high power pistol. This is one of the originals. This is an unaltered stock Browning high power. And you'll notice the placement of the trigger is a little more forward in the trigger guard. And the BH Advanced trigger comes more rearward in the trigger guard. The motion of this trigger is kind of obviously a down and back motion, whereas the motion of the BH Advanced trigger subassembly is a much more straight back. And it appears that FN followed kind of the same cues, because that trigger is definitely recessed much more deeper in the trigger guard, and the trigger pull rearward is much more straight back. So that's probably an improvement over the original. We don't have the scrubby sounding. What you hear there is the magazine disconnect rubbing against the magazine. That's gone completely. This is a very clean take-up. The take-up phase of the trigger on the new high power is comparable to the P35. The brake is reasonably clean, and overall, and the over travel is very little and almost none, and almost indistinguishable, but it's just barely there. Trigger reset in the high power is unconvincing, and we call it just okay. I'm going to talk about that here for just a moment. When we trigger scaled this high power, and that was just a little bit earlier today, we got trigger brake readings between 3 pounds, 11 ounces, and right at 4 pounds. So roughly 3 3/4 to 4 pound kind of trigger brakes. That's light for a single action trigger, and at least for me anyway, I think for a lot of people, that's a little on the light side for a defensive firearm. Going to notice the total trigger travel of the new high power. We do have the customary take-up. That's just about what you'd expect on a well-tuned P35, actually. Nothing's changed too much. I'll let you hear it. It's very clean. There's nothing really going on there. And the brake, quite clean. There's no real evidence of like trigger creep or a gray zone that we sometimes talk about with the original operating system. Watch my finger as I pull rearward. If you were able to see that, just a little movement, distinguishable, barely any, when the sear lever cleared that trigger lever. And this is the part that is kind of unconvincing, and it is that right there. It's okay. It's fine. It's not authoritative. It's not convincing return or reset of the trigger. However, it's relying on the same spring as always. In this high power, the one that's creating resistance on the trigger, that's creating a less than 4 pound trigger pull in this particular high power, is also the one responsible for the reset. So one of the trade-offs for that, very light trigger pull, especially in a single action in a high power design, one of the trade-offs is less authoritative reset. One thing that, among some things that were resolved, this is your original high power. What happens when you hit the magazine release? The magazine doesn't leave, and that was characteristics of high powers really all the way to the end, except for the ones that had what was called a mousetrap magazine. BHSpringSolutions kind of resolved that, and that was with magazine eject assist on the trigger subassembly, the BH Advanced trigger subassembly, which actually ejects the magazine like that. The FN high power, it's not going to eject in the same position you just saw the magazine eject assisted BH Advanced trigger subassembly just eject the magazine, but you know, with gravity it will fall free, although it's not, you know, per se being ejected from the handgun. It's also not getting stuck in there and having to be manually pulled out. The magazines themselves, these are probably an improvement over the original high power magazines. I'm going to show you here. They've got some areas that don't exist on the original high power magazines, and we think probably that's going to help to reinforce the feed lips. That's one of the weak areas of the original high power magazines, and kind of can limit their life, you know, after a dozen years or so, sometimes of hard use. And we think probably this is an improvement. You're going to see that a traditional high power magazine with a +2 base plate, that is, it's dimensionally the same. So in other words, FN didn't really actually like do anything, you know, newsworthy as far as size to accommodate 17 rounds. This was already happening in 2022. BHSpringSolutions introduced the 17 round Metgar magazine with the +2 base plate. Can also go back to a 15 in the case of this one. A 13 can be a 15 or go back to a 13 with the +2 base plate. Very, very versatile on your 40 Smith & Wesson high powers. Your 10 rounders can become a 12. And you know, so the dimensions of them, you know, when they're holding the same amount of ammunition, they're very, very comparable. So, but we think that probably the body, the housing, possibly the follower, these may be improved designs that come in the new FN high power. And finally, we looked at sights. And sights on the FN high power, they are what they are, very basic. They're fixed sights, no dots, no lines, no luminaries, no night sights or anything like that on this particular model. And we didn't notice on FN's website any options where that's concerned yet either, as far as the sights go. We've got one observation more, and this is a kind of a out of place looking sort of little handgun. This is a Browning 1911-22. This is one of the first ones they came out with. It was actually the first model they came out with, and it has a metal frame. Now, they've came out with about 139 more variants of this since then, and I believe they've all had a polymer frame. And then when they came out with the 1911-380, they just went straight to polymer. I don't think they ever made a metal frame, but this one is, no kidding, a metal frame. I believe it's aluminum. And I kind of have developed a little bit of a theory, hunch of what I think is going on here with FN's high power. Because of the weight factor and the carry fatigue factor of carrying a handgun in this weight caliber for a 9mm, that could, you know, from a marketing standpoint, that could be a hard sell. And so for that reason, you know, we're speculating, thinking that probably a polymer version of this new high power would be in order. It won't change the aesthetics if it goes polymer too much. The way they've designed this, it's going to remain, you know, the same in the catalog virtually, if they do that. And then they're going to have a more weight competitive kind of a pistol. So it seems like maybe that's a similar kind of a play. It seemed to work out good with the 1911-22. Where maybe, you know, the concern was the purists want something that's metal for a 1911, and they got it in the beginning, and then it kind of was seamless that it just flipped over to polymer frames mostly. Maybe that's what's going to happen here, maybe not. But there you go. That's the everything that we have been able to evaluate and analyze so far in the new FN high power. I'm Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC, BHSpringSolutions.com, and we will be coming with a shooting demonstration video of the new FN high power real soon, so watch for that. Thanks again, folks. Ciao.